Okay, I have top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We will not keep you waiting any longer. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar called Avoiding Recalls. And we're going to focus in on three specific areas where we think that you could hear a little bit more information, and maybe that will be beneficial to you in avoiding recalls in the future. So super excited today. While you are getting ready for us to start, if you could take a quick look at our antitrust statement. Anytime that we get people together that could be competitors, where they may be interacting verbally or within a chat, we are required to put up our antitrust statement. So, we're not going to have any conversations today about price fixing or boycotting or dividing up of territories of any nature. So just take a minute to read that while you are considering the screen. I will tell you, we will have the recording available to you. And I believe our wonderful marketing director, Ku, has typed that into the chat so that you can see that. We will make that available to you. So you will get the recording after today's webinar. All right, your speakers for today, myself. Many of you will recognize me as the compliance manager for SQFI. I've been here in that position for over 5 years now. It's been a while. Always good to have you all here and be on a webinar. Joining me today is Denise Webster. She is the VP of Food Safety Training and Consulting for one of our certification bodies, SCS Global. And you can see all of the vast experience that Denise has had. And so I'm excited for us to hear from her today, knowing that she is quite knowledgeable in food safety, and she's going to share some of that knowledge with us today. So our topic for today, recalls. I always share a statistic with people, and I talk about how putting $1's worth of money into prevention goes a long way into preventing cost of poor quality. And so recalls would fall within that cost of poor quality. And so you want to look at what you can do as far as best practices go for many of the things that we're going to talk about today. Selecting and managing suppliers, leveraging your EMP program, and being able to have that robust allergen management program that will help carry you through those near misses and hopefully prevent recalls from even occurring. And so again, so happy to have you today. You can type your questions into the chat at any time or use that Q&A button at the bottom, and we will try to possibly answer some questions as we go along, but also we will have Q&A at the end. So we will absolutely save some time for answering questions. So the first slide we've got here, we want to talk a little bit about numbers. So we hear about recalls here at SQF. Being a global organization, we get notified of all the recalls around the world annually, and that can account for as many as 5,000 or 6,000 recalls. Here in the U.S., though, we see a little bit more limited data going off of what we see coming out of the FDA and the USDA. And so what you see here, though, is that in 2024, we've actually seen an increase in recalls. And the information there on your screen is from the FDA dashboard. If you've never been to the FDA website, looked at the dashboard, I would strongly encourage you to do that. And you can find it by just Googling FDA dashboard, and you can get straight to that screen. We do have the link on the slide there. But you can see this breakdown of information. So looking at those class 1, class 2, class 3 recalls that have happened in 2024, you can see that there's quite a few of them. And the year is not over with yet. And so, of course, when you bring up the dashboard, making sure that you filter by food and cosmetic, and that will get you, I think, the information that you're looking for. But yeah, just know we've seen an increase in 2024, and that's unfortunate. So let's just pause for a moment, look at the USDA numbers associated with outbreaks this year. There have been quite a few. They're looking at the graph on the left for 2023. What you see is outbreaks by pathogen. And I mean, right there, number one, salmonella. What you don't see is listeria on that list. And if you look at the chart on the right, that's coming off of data from this year and all the listeria outbreaks that we're seeing as it relates to the USDA there. And you know, in light of recent recalls, I'm sure you all are not surprised at the chart that we're seeing and just the number of outbreaks that we've seen this year for listeria has been a little bit shocking, I think, for me. Now, what we're not seeing is that same type of information. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah. So I want to jump to, so we talked about pathogens. So salmonella, listeria. Let's pause a minute and talk about allergens, because if you look at the FDA information, really the number one cause of recalls there is undeclared allergens. And so you can see the 2023 data again for those types of recalls. Absolutely 3-1 over the number two cause of recalls in 2023. And now we're seeing an increasing number in 2024. And so we're up to 296, affecting 127 facilities, meaning that some facilities have multiple recalls. And what they're seeing here is the majority of those are undeclared for nuts, milk, and sesame. Now, I will say in 2023, we kind of expected that, Denise, to see that jump up in sesame with the U.S. adding sesame into our Big Nine, but we really didn't see a lot of that. And so by comparison, I wanted to show you all the data for SQF and what we've seen and our trends for the last 3 years. And so if you look at 2022, 2023, 2024, those numbers are just through August for 2024 data, so keep that in mind. So biological, I hope what's jumping out at you there is that through August of this year, we have seen as many biological recalls as we saw in 2022 and 2023. And that number has climbed since August. So we're going to far surpass that. Chemical or allergen recalls, as they get classified there, significantly down this year as far as SQF goes, which is a little bit different than what we're seeing on the FDA information there. And keeping in mind also that, you know, one FDA recall might impact, you know, half a dozen or a dozen SQF sites because of the entire supply chain there. So yeah, so we count each facility that has the recall. So chemical are down. Physical, again, we've almost surpassed what we saw in 2022 and 2023. As you can see, listeria almost always is at the top for us. Definitely will be number one this year, but usually listeria and salmonella kind of even in the breakdown. As my assistant Elizabeth likes to say, they're leading the race that you don't want to be leading. And so we kind of see listeria pulling away this year. As far as our undeclared allergens, milk is number one and wheat is number two for SQF certified sites. And then physical always comes down to plastic and metal. They battle it out back and forth for number one and number two. But I mean, overall, we're seeing an increase in as well in recalls in 2024, and we'll definitely surpass our previous numbers. So yeah, so first question here, what can we do? You know, and if any of you all have been on recalls or have been on webinars with me, you will know that my favorite topic to talk about, root cause analysis. And I talk about it often because for some reason we're just not getting it. We're just not getting it. And so root cause, taking and finding that root cause and putting in those corrective actions and those preventive actions will help us to be proactive in the future to make sure those things do not occur. And then you've got several of the bullet points there. If you're SQF certified, you're going to know those things. So senior management commitment, having those robust procedures in place, talking about communicating, everything. I mean, that just touches everything. Food safety culture, validation and verification, as well as having that continuous improvement mindset. Now, I will say, we do have our first question already in the chat. So I'm going to touch that real quick before I pass that off to Denise. So let's take a look at that first question before we go on to that next slide. So we've got a question about how do we explain the increase of recalls with the outcome of food safety audit results. Well, that's a great question. And so, recalls can happen to anybody on any given day. You put those procedures in place and you ensure people are following them. However, things do happen, unfortunately. And we're going to go through some data here over the course of this webinar that will focus on some areas that we think we need to dig in a little bit deeper, on our audits and take a look at some of the things that we need to be looking at a little bit closer. But I also think we're getting better at reporting recalls. And I think the CDC and I think the regulatory agencies are getting better at identifying outbreaks and connecting them. So I think we will continue to see an increase in recalls with that respect, as we get better at identifying them and, putting all the pieces together. We also have a question just real quick about the percentage of recalls caused by food packaging. I don't know about you, Denise. I'm not aware of any recalls that have been specifically related to the food packaging industry. How about you?
Not directly in terms of the data I'm seeing out there, but from just being in the industry and client related issues, sometimes they're quality related, right? There might be an issue with the liner on the can. There might be some packaging that is not holding up shelf life. So we don't see them sometimes come through because they're more quality related instead of really food safety related. You're right. There's not usually a propensity for food safety related recall issues as it relates to packaging, thankfully.
Yeah, and that's what we see here at SQF. So, SQF sites are not required to notify us of a quality withdrawal. However, some of them do, just in case. So we do see spoilage, shelf life, some things like that. But definitely nothing food safety related to packaging. So, so again, back to our root cause analysis cycle, there are steps in the process and you just need to follow that. And unfortunately, we kind of tend to shortcut some of them. You identify the problem, we're pretty good at that, whether it's regulatory or consumers or your SQF auditor that points that out to you. You identify the problem. Defining the problem can be a challenge for some people, and making sure that we get a good problem statement, which will allow us to understand that problem. And then, kind of identifying that root cause. I see a lot of people that use the 5 whys, but they really stop short of getting to the exact root cause. And so I often find myself asking sites, but why? Why did that happen? So that I can encourage them to go a little bit deeper. And then getting that corrective and preventive action. I can't tell you how important that step is. So corrective action is correcting the root cause of the problem. Preventive action is looking at similar processes that have the potential to have that same problem and preventing it from happening there. So we want to get that preventive action. And then that continuous monitoring is just so critical to making sure that that problem does not reoccur.
Yeah, I do find, Tammy, that it is on the skipping the defining the problem. We're going right from identifying issue right to problem solving and not really making sure we have the right problem to solve in the first place. And so then it could end up being not an effective and efficient identification of the root cause.
Exactly. So don't skip any steps. Make sure you hit them all and you do them all justice and making sure that you complete that cycle. So, today, as promised, we're going to look at 3 common risks. So we've got supplier management. And I just from SQF perspective, we see about 50% of our recall notifications are due to suppliers. Whether it be a warehouse notifying us. And, we just had a question come up in the chat about, our warehouse is causing recalls. And I'm not aware of any warehouse that's caused any recalls this year, but we do get notification because they are having to recall product from people that they house product for. So about 50% of our recalls are coming from suppliers, about 2/3 of them from suppliers, and then another 1/3 are warehouses letting us know that one of their clients has had to have a recall. And then you've got environmental management we're going to talk about today, and allergens. And, as we've said, they rise to the top of that list of, what's causing recalls. So absolutely. So I think we have our first poll, and if you all will, who's going to put going to put our poll up. And so please select one choice there. What is your biggest challenge in proactively addressing improvements in your program to reduce risk? And I don't know about you, Denise, but I'm curious about how this is going to turn out here. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you have a guess at what way it's going to go?
Well, I think the challenge is asking you guys to identify the biggest challenge, because I think we can all find that all of these have an element of truth to them. So really
Exactly.
selecting one that really is like, yeah, I definitely need a 2025 plan to address.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. How are we looking, Co? We got our results. Okay, so 57% came in at resources and time. Wow, okay. Followed not quite as closely by senior management commitment at 23%. 13 of you said key stakeholder support. And then we've got 5 of you that said other. So if you want to type in the chat what those other things are, just to kind of enlighten us on what you're seeing as your top barrier or biggest challenge in addressing improvements in your program, we are anxious to hear. So, all right, well, good deal. Thank you all for participating. I think we might have another poll or 2 coming up later, and you all can jump in on that. But with that, I am going to hand it off to Denise, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about supplier management.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that poll. I think it is telling to see that resources and time are something that we are the most concerned about, because we maybe do have the tools, maybe we do have the commitment, but we don't have the time to focus our efforts in those areas that are in most need. And I can definitely say, as a trainer and consultant, I feel the time pressure every day, and maybe AI will solve some problems for us. Maybe that'll be one of our next webinars for 2025. And so that's what we're hoping to achieve today, is give you guys some focused priorities, those areas where you can take that precious time and resources that you have and put them in the area that's going to have the most impact. So from a supplier management standpoint, another big aspect of change, which is probably why we're having time and resource issues, is also just the supply chain challenges that we've seen over the years. It's increased in terms of the expand of global demand for certain products, reducing availability. which then means we need to have new suppliers that we don't necessarily have history with. We then have those economic pressures, those cost saving initiatives, maybe looking at suppliers that wouldn't be our first choice in order to still meet those economic pressures of getting that product out the door and cost effective to consumers. We also have that motivation then that comes in hand with fraudulent activities, and we'll have a slide on that to dig a little deeper into that topic. And then, of course, consumers continue to want new and novel products. And as we launch new and novel products that haven't been done before, that can increase risk. A new ingredient that isn't fully being used or understood. And we've had some recalls in the past, specifically in this category. And then also that time and resource, right? The more consumers want it, the more turnaround we have, the faster the business is asking us to approve those products, to approve those raw materials and get that out into our factory floor and out the door. So as we can see, all of these challenges can lead to that broken supply chain, that broken issue where then we end up with potentially some of these recalls if we don't address all of them. So Tammy, will you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, so just to give you guys an idea, so we're talking about our supplier management. And so, the SQF code has a section on approved suppliers. And to give you all a breakdown of where we see those top nonconformances, 2341, just for those of you that know those numbers, that is all about your documented program. And so you can see that and the 2342 really are leading the pack in the approved supplier requirements there. So typically what our auditors are seeing are, missing procedural elements. So maybe a site wrote their procedure, but did not fully encompass all of the SQF requirements within that procedure, or they created the procedure and then they're not following their own documented process. And so I think that's where we see most of those misses there. And then moving into the approved supplier requirement. So there's a whole list in there of things that need to be included in that approved supplier program. And we will see auditors that when they're on site, they're reviewing some of those approved supplier files, and they're just missing some of the documentation where it's maybe it's the supplier's third party certificate, food safety certificate, maybe that's missing. So I see a lot of sites that will say we do an annual supplier survey, and maybe the site hasn't sent the survey out, or maybe the suppliers haven't returned the survey, but there's not that closed loop where we're checking to make sure that all of that is being met. And then we see some other random nonconformances as far as, missing the verification of raw materials coming in, whether it's, checking the C of A or doing some product testing when it comes in, and we miss that verification. Even though we say you can use emergency suppliers, they still have to be approved emergency suppliers. And so we miss that approval process occasionally. Another miss is sister facilities. I worked for a large organization, and one of our sister facilities was a supplier to us. And we treated them like we treated every other supplier. They had to meet all the requirements of our approved supplier program. So don't forget that. And then the supplier audit. So if you are going out there and you've included supplier audits as a part of your program, you need to make sure the person conducting those audits is trained. And so, again, those last few are kind of fewer on the nonconformance list, but definitely making sure you're following your process meets the code requirements, and your supplier files are complete will go a long way into helping you be successful when it comes to supplier management. And I think I'm going to hand it back to Denise. I think she's got more to talk about.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see the sister site one being on the top list there. When I think about that, I also think about the corporate issue where corporate might be the one that's selecting and buying and approving the suppliers, but not really connecting that to the site and what challenges might be existing at the site and those gaps that could occur. So I thought, yeah, that's an interesting one to pay attention to. So what do we need to do? As Tammy mentioned, we do need to improve our selecting and evaluating potential suppliers. We have to remember it's not just a one-step process. Like Tammy had mentioned, we send out this requalification. Trust me, I've done it. I know we just send it out, we get documents back, we file it a folder, bam, they're reapproved. But that's just a hurdle that we're putting in place. We really need to guard and put proactive barriers for entry. We really need, just like if you were going to a high security area, they're going to ask for your driver's license, maybe even a background check. They're going to take your license plate down from your car. They're going to do that due diligence. They're not just going to look at you and say, okay, you look good, go through. So what do we need to do to up our game when it comes to selecting and evaluating and reapproving of our suppliers? This is a great time of year because we're at the end of the year, and New Year is when we can kind of chase everybody. So we need to relook at that specification. Is it up to date? Is it still relevant? Does it match what we know it to be true? Look at the data that we have had coming in on that raw material. Yes, their updated food safety audit, looking at it from the perspective of what are they challenged with, and if they're nonconformances or anything that maybe we need to look at, or even go to the site ourselves and make sure that, if there is a high risk item, that we have those quality elements considered as well. Regulatory compliance, as we mentioned, the FDA data dashboard. If that site has ever been audited by the FDA, both domestic and international, they will show up on the data dashboard. That's a great way to check, at least from a US regulatory perspective. And just overall asking if they've had any recalls or issues in the past year, or your own historical considerations with that supplier. Has everything been good? Or have there been challenges? Maybe even challenges in their response time to address an issue could be telling. Allergen matrix and plan, especially with the changes in sesame being added to the top 9 now for the FDA, and just global consideration for allergens. What is their current challenges in allergen, and do they have robust controls in place to meet your specific allergens of concern in your facility and your product? And then, of course, our environmental monitoring, which we'll dive into more. If it is a high risk item, you might want to dive a little deeper, not just check off the box with their food safety audit and any other specific controls or needs related to that risk of that raw material. And as Tammy mentioned, maybe a testing C of A. It's not required by the SQF code, but if the risk says that that's important, then that is something that you should build into your plan. So as we can, yes.
Oh, Denise,
Tammy,
I was just
thoughts
gonna,
on that?
no, I was just gonna say, I'm glad you said that, because someone had asked in the chat, what is the requirement of C of A's for ingredients? So, the SQF code does not require that. The SQF code, allows you to write your program so that it meets the needs of your business while at the same time meeting food safety requirements. So, so as our questioner asked, is it per batch? We're not that prescriptive. So you need to do a risk assessment. You need to determine what level of verification of your raw ingredients. Maybe it's you do product testing. I mean, it really is up to you and what best fits your need as well. And then we do have someone else that made the comment about, not every company is third-party certified. Well, that's not required either for the code.
Right.
So you have to write your program. So, Denise has got a lot of great points up here on this slide about all the things you need to consider within your program. And going back to that one where, if you're auditing the supplier yourself, that's allowed within the code as long as you're sending someone that's knows how to audit. But maybe that's how you address that for those smaller suppliers. So, gosh, we have another question.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tammy. Just this morning, I was with a client and doing the FSVP program, and it's vinegar, and they don't have a GFSI based audit, but it's vinegar. It's low risk, probably not an issue. there's likelihood that we don't have to necessarily have that GFSI audit, and we have other ways that we can show that it is safe and quality and acceptable to bring in to our organization or into the US.
Exactly. So we've got a good question in the chat, and
Mhm.
Denise, you might want to take this one. How can you ensure suppliers are not making changes without notifying you? So, what would you build into a program to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, it's funny. That actually happened to one of my clients this year, and we had to update luckily there was no allergen impact, but the worst case could be that, yes, there now is an unknown allergen undeclared that's passed through because we're not getting that notification. And that is where it's not just about selecting and evaluating that supplier once a year, but really being a partner with your suppliers and making sure they know that they need to communicate any risk or changes, and as well as the raw material team or the team that's receiving the product and the team that's using the product. If there's anything changed, we should be verifying it, making sure it's the same product, it's the right supplier. There are checks and balances that we can do and not just solely rely on the supplier to remember to tell us to. Okay. So we also did want to focus on food fraud as a risk. We have talked about doing those raw material hazard analysis for biological, chemical, physical, right? Those are all key steps. But are we putting enough effort to evaluate food fraud? Obviously, there has been an uptick in food fraud given those supply chain challenges I mentioned earlier. But there's also been the recent issue in respects to lead in the cinnamon. When we all heard about that, we all thought, well, lead is naturally occurring. It's in the ground. Maybe the soil was contaminated, only to find out that actually, it was lead chromate. It was illegally added, and that this is an issue that is a known issue for certain spices. And uh, ultimately, they do that to increase their weight and enhance the color when it is inferior. And so that, of course, increases its monetary value. So, how do we start really doing deeper dive food fraud vulnerability assessments and making sure that we are thinking like the criminal or the bad guy? We want to look at it almost like we created this Venn diagram because now also organic requires us to do a food fraud analysis. And it really looks at it from three areas that all kind of merge together. It's that opportunity. Is there an opportunity or means to commit fraud? And then is there that motivation? Is that raw material a high risk product from a cost, supply chain challenges? Is there a potential financial pressure or reward for them to fraudulently substitute or dilute or do something to create that economic advantage? And then just that rationalization. We need to be able to show that justification for that fraud is or isn't existing. And those coming together could show that increase in risk. So we do need to do a little bit more deeper dive this coming year on really putting proactive prevention to reduce vulnerability. And maybe some of those C of A testing is testing not for food safety and things we already know, but things that might be contaminants in our supply chain. And just to finish the supply chain management section, we wanted to give you just some best practices to reduce risk, which is one, understanding those inherent risks to your specific ingredients and groups of ingredients, just like we talked about from a fraud standpoint, composition, its ability to be interchanged. We want to stay vigilant on business pressures, whether that be external, global, or also internal. Maybe there is a need to reduce the cost of the products, and more suppliers are going to need to be vetted. So you want to know that before you're given, hey, can you approve the supplier? Really start looking at being a better partner with R&D and buying and having some oversight. Really build that knowledge of what changes are coming. Create a pathway for transparency and trust within those key stakeholders in your organization. So as technical food safety and quality professionals, we're not just given the task to complete. We're actually engaged in the front end of the conversation and what needs are coming down the pipeline so we can better prepare and do all those checklist things that we talked about to ultimately reduce risk. And then the trust but verify, making sure we verify and do traceability activities, just like we talked about before, to make sure we are getting the right product from the right approved suppliers, and there hasn't been any changes or issues occurring. Okay, Tammy.
Before we move on from supplier management, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
So let's, one's an addition 10 question, and I'll take that one. You know, does SQF have any plans to add change management to the standard? So what I tell sites all the time, it's already there. Somehow you all just missed it. Under 2.3.1, it really talks about change management. And a lot of people look at 2.3.1 and they think that it is just about, because it's about product realization, and people think it's just about new products, but it's not. If you read that section of the code, it is all about changes to equipment, changes in suppliers, changes in ingredients. So change management is already there. But to answer your question, we're gonna up our game a little bit for edition 10, and there will be stronger language around change management. So there will be more to come on that. But then also, here's one for you, Denise. What would you recommend for warehouses that just sell and they don't test to challenge for food fraud? So what's your recommendation there?
Yeah, just, at the end of the day, we're responsible for the activity and supply chain that is in our wheelhouse. And if we're a warehouse, that activity is making sure that we're bringing in the right product from the approved suppliers, and that we are doing our piece to make sure those suppliers are robust. So depends on exactly, are you just a warehouse that's distributing, or are you an intermediate warehouse? So you have to identify who are your partners and who's responsible for ultimately making sure that what you're getting is, approved. But also there are some things, right? Tamper evidence, making sure things are fully sealed. If anything looks damaged, tampered, we want to make sure to protect those trucks when, with locked seals, traceable, trackable seals. We need to make sure that we're doing our piece, and that there's not going to be an issue with the bad guy being the truck driver, or the bad guy being out there at a truck stop trying to access, or there's some other issues going on. So we have to do all of our parts in the supply chain.
All right, so let's talk about environmental monitoring. So, what is it? So why do I need an environmental monitoring program? So you're looking to identify those pathogens before they creep their way into the product and make someone sick. So that's what we're looking for. To pause there for a second. I've been battling a cold all week. So looking at it, making sure that our environmental monitoring program is risk-based. Excuse me. Denise?
Yeah, I'll take it for a minute here, so I Tammy coughs. So yes, making sure our environmental program is risk-based, meaning it is fit for purpose. It's based on the product, the design, hygiene, what is it ready to eat, not ready to eat, right? Risk comes in many different forms. And that then also then has a direct relationship into the sampling locations that you're choosing, and making sure that they're on adequate rotation, that we have designed the adequate methods, right? I think I saw a question in the chat field about laboratory results. Yes, making sure any lab results, if you're sending it out for pathogen testing or a finished product or raw material, that it's from an accredited lab, and that they have the ISO 17025 accreditation, and that their methods are on their accreditation, because that's also key. Sometimes we forget. And then not just bringing in those test results, but actually looking at them, monitoring them, tracking and trending. There's a lot of great tools in being able to track environmental monitoring and find those hot spots. Tammy, do you want to?
I think I'm back. I think. Ooh, okay. So yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that being on the scope of accreditation. So too many times, we'll have labs that are doing tests that they're not accredited to do. And we're not necessarily looking for that. We just look for that accreditation and we don't look at that scope. So make sure you're looking at their scope of accreditation. But as Denise said, it's not enough just to do the testing. You have to look at those results and track and trend them as necessary. Because at the end of the day, this program is to prevent recalls, it's to prevent outbreaks and those illnesses that are causing people to be sick and hospitalized. So making sure we're just doing the right things for sure. I did bring along a little data as far as environmental monitoring as well. So looking there at the requirements for environmental monitoring, there are three. The first one being the documented program, the second one sampling and testing, and the third one is all about that data analysis, the monitoring and the trending. As you can see, for minor nonconformance, it's like a three-way split, even across the board. And so, we're seeing in some cases, the risk analysis is just inaccurate. One of the first things I do when I see a site that has had a recall is I look at their audit report to see whether they're checking for that particular pathogen in their environmental monitoring program. Was that pathogen identified in their food safety plan as something they needed to be concerned with? And because it's not enough just to do the food safety plan and develop that environmental monitoring program, it has to be accurate. So you have to identify the pathogens of concern for your particular product, for your particular facility. So everybody's program is going to be, different. So making sure that that risk analysis is there and make sure it's correct. And then adhering to your sampling schedule, making sure the testing is getting done, and then making sure you are reacting to those results. And then, of course, the data analysis, monitoring, trending. I don't know about you, Denise, but I tell auditors, if you're going into a site and they have 0 positives or presumptive positives, they're not looking for it or they're not being truthful. So, and either one I think is equally bad, right?
Yeah, it's very possible, right? Unless they have that deeper dive re-review of their data and they can show that, I have a natural color manufacturer, for example, as a client for many years, and we've never found anything. Their environment just doesn't support the growth, which is great. But continually challenging the data, making sure your sampling is robust, you're using the right methods, you're doing everything in your power, then yes, then I'm okay with saying, okay, you haven't found anything great.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked at a facility and we never found anything. And I had a VP come in one day and he said, "You're not looking for it, Tammy." And he said, "Check there, there, and there." And he pointed out 3 spots and they all came back presumptive positive. And I was like, oh my, I mean, it just never occurred to me that we weren't looking in the right spots. We had
Yeah.
several hundred, locations that we were testing, but we weren't testing the right places. So challenge your program, definitely, especially if you're not seeing any presumptives or positive results. Definitely challenge your system. And then just, I was just going to point out a little bit difference in the major data. So, once we look at the majors, about half of that is coming back on that risk analysis, which really is the foundation for your program. Making sure you do that risk analysis correctly, identifying those pathogens, and then setting up that program so that you can actually find it for sure. Let's see, we have a question. What is the best course of action if the schedule is not adhered to due to unavailability of testing supplies? That's a great question. Someone messaged us the other day and said they're seeing a shortage in swabbing materials. I don't know if you've heard that lately, Denise, but that was the first I had heard about it. So I'm definitely going to do a little bit of research to find out if that is accurate and what the cause of that is, because that could negatively impact a lot, a lot of
Yeah,
supply.
I'm surprised to hear that too. I didn't know that there was an issue. I mean, I guess my advice there is call another lab, order online, make sure you have enough in advance, right? Because they don't expire those fast. The swabs do expire, but they have quite a good shelf life on them. So making sure you have enough and you're not running short either. But I think anytime there's a nonconformance and you have a deviation from any of your policies or procedures, you write yourself up a CAPA, right? What then what was the root cause? What are you going to do to prevent it in the future? Even when it is factors that you may not have anticipated, like a supply chain shortage.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, let's see. Yeah, several people are commenting that there is a shortage. So I'm gonna have to do some more research on that. But as Denise
Stock
said,
up.
yeah, exactly, stock up. But also, have a plan. So what are you gonna do to ensure that the product is safe? Okay. Um, then we also had one question about should they put product on hold if it's positive on a food contact surface? Well, I don't think I'd be wanting to send out product that I have done zone 1 swabs on until I get those results back. Because I think that's just being probably reckless and just asking to have a recall. So
Yeah, I would
positive
refer
release.
everyone
Yeah,
back to the guidance documents, right? FDA has a guidance document on listeria and ready-to-eat food. There are guidance documents out there on salmonella. Without understanding the situation, I think at the end of the day, it's protecting the consumer, right, is our number one priority.
exactly. So the SQF code does address positive release. So making sure that you're following that requirement. Okay. So yeah,
Excellent.
next slide there.
Okay. So we just wanted to kind of give you some additional fundamentals in this area to create and maintain that robust EMP, kind of beyond even what we've talked about before, which is, yes, definitely understand the current regulatory requirements. As I mentioned, the guidance documents, what are the latest issues? Are you doing enough in that area that if your governmental body even came to your organization and did a swabathon, that you would know and you would be ready and you would have confidence in your program, as well as evaluating your current results and trends. There's always an opportunity. And I thought about that too, Tammy. I always have some spots that I know I can find at least listeria, which is, for example, if it's a warm environment and then I've got a cooler right there by the seals of that cooler, maybe there's a sliding door underneath that, any of those like niches, those areas where temperature differential can occur is one of those that I always have high on my list of ahas. And also just equipment, legs and poles actually too. Even those poles that have the epoxy, they can start breaking down. It can get in, the epoxy under those poles can be an issue. So making sure you're
Absolutely.
really looking at it. Yeah. Uh, and then ensuring effective senior leadership communication. So when you do have that positive unfinished product, right? This is not just us as food safety and quality professionals making a decision, right? We bring all the powers that be together, making sure senior leadership is aware. The worst thing you can do is hide the issue. Communicate. And then that record keeping, it's there. That positive is there. So now you need to follow that record keeping all the way through, from that deviation report to how you've addressed it to the product being put on hold. What was the disposition, proof of disposition? This is all important, not just for SQF, but from a regulatory standpoint and consumer protection. And then, as we mentioned, having that continuous improvement mindset. If you're not finding it, keep digging. use different investigational approaches, look at the people flow, the product flow. These are elements that you can go back when you're doing your annual reassessment of your environmental monitoring program to ensure that it is top notch. As well as we're going to kind of give you a few more best practices when we're looking at the trend analysis. We do want to consider if we are seeing an increase in pathogens, listeria, for example, is it the same area? Is it similar areas? That key factor on the right-hand side could be people flow, product flow. Maybe there's an increased overall percentage of incidence of environmental pathogens, related or unrelated. Is that due to design, hygiene, cleaning effectiveness? Maybe even your chemical regimen is needing to be evaluated. I know some sites will switch out the sanitizer. There's some, theory on that. What works for your organization might not work for another organization. You really have to look at it from what is your trend analysis and what is it showing that is really ultimately detecting that contamination so you can reduce the risk of it ending up a safety issue in your food. So where are your gaps and how can they be improved? Should really be your key takeaway when you're diving into reassessing your environmental monitoring. Okay, Tammy, you want to take our last pillar?
I do. So we've got allergen control. I do know we have several more questions in the chat about environmental monitoring. But just to let you know, we're not gonna, it's hard for us to talk specifics because really you need to assess your facility, your site to determine if you need the whole product. Positive release is a requirement of the food safety code. So, if you're doing product testing, absolutely, that is required. But also, there's just so much deeper we could go into talking about drains and all of that because there's a lot of things to be done around that, especially. But we're gonna move on to allergen control so we can get through all of our webinar today. So so next slide. Allergen control. So what are we doing here? So we need to implement that strong product or that strong program to prevent cross contact, labeling errors, making sure that you're looking at it across the board. Also keeping up with changes. We mentioned, I think, sesame earlier being added to the list, making sure you're aware of all the countries where your product is going to be used to make sure that you're keeping up with the allergen requirements within that country as well. Again, using that cross-functional team and just keeping up with everything. So, some of the things here that you're going to look for to include in your program, your raw material assessment. You should assess every single ingredient input into the process for allergens. So, some of the things that I think are often missed, maintenance chemicals, things that are in our break room, things that are in our office areas that could migrate out into the production area. So making sure we're considering everything that is within our building to see if it has an impact. Labeling, huge issue. And if we were to break down all of those undeclared allergen recalls, I think we're going to find out a significant number of them come not necessarily from the design and accuracy, although we do see a few of those, where something gets missed on a new label and the allergen's not declared, or it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements for where it needs to be placed or the size it needs to be. But really that next one, inventory control and reconciliation, making sure that you're putting the right product in the right label is where I think we would find that most of those recalls come from. And then, accountability is so crucial, making sure that we have those checks and balances. We say label reconciliation, that was a requirement we added for edition 9. And so I had many people that reached out and said, do you mean we have to count the labels? And I said, well, that's certainly one method of label reconciliation. However, I would not recommend that for everybody. Because, for everybody, counting labels is not a way to reconcile labels. And so there are lots of different ways that you can do that. And then, of course, those review and release protocols to make sure that everything that should have been done was done before the product is released. So I created this slide here to make sure that we kind of see where those requirements are missed during our SQF audit. And the first one, 2811, is all about that risk assessment that I talked about, those ingredients coming in, making sure you do that risk assessment. And then another place was allergen segregation. I do get an opportunity to go into a lot of facilities, and I see a lot of sites that will forget that when they are storing allergens with non-allergens, the protocols there for making sure that no contamination occurs. And so some of those best practices are often overmissed. And then the validation and verification and cleaning, that is our number one on our minor list and number two on our major list. We have to validate and verify our cleaning to make sure that we are preventing that cross contamination from occurring. Now, in red there, I put label reconciliation, because as I said, I think if we break down those recalls with the FDA recalls, I think what we're going to find is a lot of it is we put the wrong product in the wrong label. And so it ultimately ended up in undeclared allergens because of the formula that was put in. But we're not seeing that many nonconformances for label reconciliation. So I think if there was one thing I would take away from this, there's a huge opportunity for improvement. In our auditing skills, both internal auditors and external auditors, making sure we know what label reconciliation is and making sure that we're doing it correctly, so that we do not get that unintended mix up at the production line. So that's what we're seeing. So looking at the design and accuracy, again, making sure we understand the country of sale and regulations, new label review and approval processes. And I know, that can be time consuming. I came from a facility where it seemed like we always had something, a new label coming in, or, the customer wanted to change the color of the box or something. So I spent a lot of time reviewing labels and making sure that allergen information was accurate. Declaration versus advisory statements. Those may contain statements. They're great, but they're not that great. And they are not a substitute for having a solid cleaning and sanitation program that makes sure that you don't have that cross-contamination. Controlling disposing of old labels so that we don't have any unattended use of something that maybe's been updated, and just a great receiving group, making sure they're inspecting things as it comes in, so that if something does change, they're your first line of defense coming into the building to point out to you that, hey, and we had a recall where there was a site that received both a allergen version and a non-allergen version of an ingredient. And when it came in, the receiving department noticed something different, but they didn't speak up and, created a recall because of it. So yeah, they're your first line of defense for sure.
Yeah, and even on those design elements, I'm with you, Tammy. I review labels almost every week for our clients. And in the past, when I was in retail, we had thousands of labels. And the one thing that I notice is if we need to, again, get ahead of the curve and look at how the design elements are happening, where if you've got a top label and a side label, and that side label isn't matching, or if I've got 4 flavors and they all look exactly the same, the risk goes up, especially if one of those has pine nuts or sesame and the other flavor doesn't. And if it's two labels, it can get mixed up. And yes, a lot of that can be resolved by better design of those and cross-referencing codes.
Absolutely. We've seen mismatches of top and bottom labels,
Yeah.
creating recalls for some of our sites. So absolutely.
Yeah. And so as
Uh,
Tammy mentioned, it simply is get the correct product into the correct packaging. We've given you a bunch of questions to think about here, which is, are based on frequency and that label reconciliation. You all had a question about that. Well, are you checking every film roll or master case before use, or are you doing that every hour check? Well, if I've gone through 5 film rolls and 10 master cases in an hour, then likely I could miss something. So having that person that's responsible for loading up that film roll, grabbing that master case, doing that first point of check, and then yes, adding on the extra verification of QA or a line lead that is checking and making sure that they're checking the start of the run, whatever those intervals, and the end of the run as well. All of these questions are really also rooted in why things have occurred. And so if you ask yourself these questions, then perhaps you can close some of those gaps. Also, communication, right? When does label reconciliation go wrong? Well, during changeovers. If we're not doing our appropriate line clearance, if we're leaving stuff out in the line, or we're in a hurry and we go grab the wrong product. So definitely taking that deeper dive. And that all leads into our food safety culture. All of these practices are really not independent of each other, they're together. Food safety culture, from leadership to the team to the communication to providing clear direction and empowerment, and just holding ourselves accountable for delivering on this, and making sure that we have that continuous improvement and risk aware mindset.
Oh, that's great, Denise. Food safety culture drives so many things. And as you said, top down, starts with leadership, all the way down to the newest employee in the plant. So, yeah. All right, we are at our Q&A time. So I think we have answered most of your questions. We are coming down to the end of our webinar. So I think we've answered most of them. But yeah, definitely, just as I always say, read the code. Read the requirements around positive release. Read the requirements around allergen control, and see what you need to do there. Because again, the code is not so prescriptive that you can't come up with a program that works for you, that is also ensuring that you have safe food at the end of it. So, absolutely. So, I'm going to let Denise tell you a little bit about what SCS has to offer before we sign off.
Yeah, and just on that note, get more training, right? Make that your mission for 2025 is to invest in yourself, invest in your team, get more training, whether it be through private, public, on demand. There's us here at SCS, we are an SQF training provider, and we offer the full suite of trainings as well as the regulatory, FDA, FSMA, and unique ones like allergen management, root cause analysis. We have on-demand training both in English and Spanish, and public and private. So that's something we offer. Consultation, right? There's a lot of questions you guys had that either us at SCS or any of your certification body partners out there that have consulting. Really, it's about making sure that you guys are getting the information you need to appropriately apply the code. And of course, we offer certification in all things from SQF to many sustainability standards as well. And you can reach out to me at that website.
I think our last slide there has both my contact and Denise's contact there. So if you have any more questions, or we didn't get to answer your question today, feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to try to give a good explanation. So again, thank you all for coming. I think Ku has put some information in the chat, so you'll be getting the recording emailed to you tomorrow. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And Denise, it was a pleasure to get to present with you. So
Same, thank you.